Hello, everybody. So today we're going to be talking about the future of Agile, which in my opinion is remote, but not just the way that you've been doing remote in 2020. I think the future of Agile is remote and asynchronous. Let's dive deeper and understand what that really means. My name is Molood Ceccarelli, and as I was just introduced, I'm the founder and CEO of Remote Forever and the founder of the first online conference in the Agile world, where 5 years ago, I tried to introduce the idea of remote working to Agile people, helping them to understand that this is indeed the future. So for 5 years, this has been my message. And this year, it's much easier than ever before for me to convey my message. So thank you for being here and listening to what I have to say. I would like to start with a question. Where do you go to get real work done? When you want to be productive, when you want to create results, when you really, really want to deep dive into your own ideas, into all the information that's available to you, and innovate and produce. If you bear with me and type in the chat, that would actually give me an idea of what you're thinking, where you actually go to get real work done. I used to go to cafes. I loved working from hotel lobbies. I loved working from cafes with a view over a park or a body of water. Where do you go to get real work done? Coffee shop? Cafe? Curled up in my couch? Those are some of the answers that we're getting in the chat box, and those are all valid options. The truth is, the office during workday is where I get my work done, said no one. This was a question that was asked from 10,000 people back in 2013. None of those people said, I go to the office when I want to get real work done. And yet, we see that a lot of corporations are investing massive amounts of money in real estate. Even now, after the pandemic, there are only a few large corporations that have decided to get rid of their offices and go fully remote. But why is that? Because remote work is hard. Even after having tried it, a lot of us don't yet know how that should be done in a good way. That was the wrong click. The Gartner did a survey back in April of 2020. That was the beginning of the pandemic. And they discovered that about 3 out of every 4 CFO decided to keep their temporary remote positions as permanently remote. A little later, as the fatigue of meeting after meeting after meeting was hitting us in July, they did another survey and the number went up. About 82% of company leader plans wanted to allow their employees to work remotely permanently. But the conversations about reopening the office and having hybrid setups had already started in summer. Later in December, that's just a couple months ago, they did another survey and the number was even higher. So the acceleration that remote work acceptance received over the past year, over the pandemic year, was phenomenal. Now, if you look at the whole situation from the Agile perspective and not necessarily from the remote work phenomena, remote work acceptance, you can see that even Agile adoption has been on the rise. This report was from 2020. It was the State of Agile report, which showed a significant number of 97% of companies that have some sort of Agile practice in their company. Now, when you put the two together, there is no doubt that Agile companies are becoming distributed and distributed companies are becoming Agile. And as I've been saying for 5 years, remote work is not the future of work. It is the reality of work. We all saw it this year, and I hope that you have finally embraced it. So let me just ask you this question now. Do you work from home or do you work remotely? And what is the difference? Engage with me in the chat and let me know. Do you work from home or do you work remotely? You see, when we work from home during the pandemic, our freedom, the essence of remote work, is taken away from us. When we work remotely, we have the freedom to work from wherever we feel most productive, just like you answered me when I asked you, where do you go to get real work done? But the fact that the majority of the world experienced working from home and called it remote work, and they experienced it in the middle of a pandemic when the essence of remote work, freedom, was taken away from them, is very telling. It means that we haven't really experienced it. So whether you have a positive opinion about it or a negative opinion about it, hold your horses and evaluate it. Let's look at it objectively and see if there is a good way to get this freedom to every individual, to enable and empower everyone to work from wherever they feel most productive, even if it is the office. So the essence of remote work is freedom. And my mission has been and is to empower every knowledge worker in the world to get the freedom to contribute to their work in a meaningful way from anywhere they want. And that's what I call remote work. And it all comes down to this sentence that I think I heard this first from Joachim Appelo, but I don't know if it's actually originally from him or if he got it from someone else. Work is not a place. Work is what we do. But let's look at the Agile Manifesto, and I'm going to walk you through the manifesto. Bear with me. Don't walk away. It's going to be okay. I know that you're all masters and you know this by heart and you've known this for 20 years or so. But I want to show you through by going through the Agile Manifesto, why we're making things more complicated than they need to be and why remote work is so difficult in the majority of Agile companies. The first question that I usually get from people who have never worked remotely but suddenly had to do so in an Agile company is, what tool should I use in order to insert in the blank? Molood, what tool should I use to do retrospective? What tool should I use to do open space? What tool should I do to do this conference? What tool should I use to do retrospectives? And I hear that, and all I can think about is, aren't we supposed to be empowering individuals and interactions and valuing that over processes and tools? So I want to challenge that in your mind and invite you to look at tools and processes differently. We're looking to find tools and processes in order to enable individuals and their interactions. So if you're adding a tool that adds processes, that adds complications, you're not solving a problem. You're adding to the problem. The next one is, in Agile, we're supposed to be valuing working product or software over comprehensive documentation. But as soon as teams go remote, since they don't have any, proper education, what happens is that they get a chat messenger and they start having channels, whether it's Microsoft Teams or Slack or any other tool that you guys use. You probably discovered that the usage of the chat app went up. You had notification, and the other tools that you used for documentation was the same. You had SharePoint, you had Confluence, you had all these documentation tools. And on the other hand, you had project management tools like Jira, like Trello, like Basecamp, like Asana. And you put all of these documentations and you were faced with information overload. So we were putting so much value in documenting everything that we kind of forgot to enable people and interactions through those tools and processes, having enough documentation so that we can deliver useful, valuable working products. The next thing is about meetings. We keep having meetings about meetings. You can take a screenshot of this and read it later. I'm not going to read it for you. But the essence of it is that we keep having meetings in order to improve things. And at the end of the day, we tell ourselves, it's all because we're working remotely. Things are not working because we're distributed. Things are not effective because we're distributed. And I want to challenge you one more time and tell you that it is not the fault of the remote work that things are inefficient and ineffective in your organization. The next thing on the Agile Manifesto is contract negotiation over customer collaboration that we do wrongly. We should do the exact opposite, right? How many of you have seen devices like this? Now, that's a very physical device that you can see on the screen right now for collecting feedback from customers in order to gather data, beautify it, visualize it, and make decisions about it. We do that with software products too. We measure so much. We collect so much data from our customers, from our stakeholders internally about the performance of our product and all of that. But what decisions are we actually making based on the data that we're collecting? That's the gap that I see in a lot of Agile companies that go remote and those that are empowered and enabled by using AI and machine learning and all the tools that empower them to collect data. Nowadays, it's almost impossible to walk into an agile company and not find a data team, right? Or a data analytics team. But I think the essence of this is that we're always trying to create a balance between doing precisely what our users want and assuming that we know what they want and ignoring them. But for us not to snap that, we need to find a good way to base our decisions on the data that we collect and collect the data that actually does impact our decision. I call that intention. So I challenge you to think a little differently about this customer collaboration and data collection that you're doing. Start with the decision. Think about what decision are you going to make based on the data that you're collecting and get super clear on that. And the last one is following a plan over responding to change. That's what we do. And here is proof. Remote work has been the reality of work for years. So how come your company suddenly became remote because of a pandemic? You see, as agile people, I think our job has been and is to not only for ourselves to respond to change, but also to empower our employers and our clients to respond to change. But I think as a community, for over a decade, we failed. We failed to acknowledge this. We failed to see that the world of work itself had changed. We went back to that sentence in the Agile Manifesto that said, collocation. And a lot of agile coaches went to different companies and said, if you're not collocated, you can't be agile, sorry. So let's embrace it because it is okay. I'm not judging you. It is human nature not to seek out a replacement until you need one. Now, in 2021, that you see that you need one, what are you going to do? As an agile individual who is capable of empowering people, using tools and processes, how can you embrace this change to remote working and actually help people to work more effectively? I could stop here or go another 10, 15 minutes. So I leave that to the moderators to let me know what you prefer.
Molood, you do have more time if you need more time. We're certainly love hearing what we're hearing from you. So feel free if you'd like to do that.
Or can you tell me how much time I have? I have 52 slides in this deck, so I can adjust and adapt.
Plus or minus 10 minutes.
Okay. Then I will continue to help you to understand, like to go a little deeper and understand some of the concepts that I like to teach and help people understand. So on the basis of embracing change, one of the fundamental questions that we need to ask ourselves is, do we really need that face-to-face to solve a problem? You are replacing all of those serendipitous moments that you had in an office, all of those pre-scheduled lunches with customers and stakeholders and partners with online video conferences. Am I right or not? On top of that, you're adding extra meetings to that. If you look at your calendar, you probably can see very easily that you have meetings from the moment your workday starts until way past the time it's supposed to stop. If you don't have a calendar like that, you're doing great. And I want to applaud you. But the majority of people who had never worked remotely before 2020 have calendars that look like that. So ask yourself, do I really need that face-to-face in order to solve the problem? And reflect and adjust your ways of working. You're agile people. You all know how to do this. You do this through retrospectives, through reflection and adaptation at the end of every iteration with all the teams that you work with. And do things differently. And the most important thing that I always say, do not replicate the office. Allow your mind to think differently, to see the reality as is and adapt your processes to the reality, not the other way around. We don't need more FaceTime. We need better and more effective communication, which is why I want to introduce you to this model. Some of you may have seen it. It's called the 5 levels of remote working. A lot of companies are at the bottom 3 levels. The level 1 is where we deny that we're a remote company, or we're actually not a remote company at all. Everybody works from an office. Sometimes company has 2 different offices, 3 different offices, but the culture, the ways of working in the company is location based. So the collaboration between the offices is not really accepted as a normal way of working. The next level is when we try to recreate the office. So when some people are remote or when we have these different offices and we're trying to replicate all of those ways that we work, like if you have a big room planning or a big visualization of a story map on a wall, you take a picture of physical Post-it notes on a physical wall and you send it in an email to the colleagues in the other office. That's replicating the office. It's not necessarily using digital tools, digital processes, simplified processes to empower people to interact with each other. The next one is what I call distributed but synchronous. And that's the situation the majority of us are in, which is having meetings after meetings after meetings that I just talked to you about. Now, the next level would be asynchronous. And of course, after that is nirvana. I've never seen a company in nirvana, but I've seen a few companies in asynchronous. Asynchronous is where you just listen to this part a little more carefully than you did before. We have communication, right? Communication is divided to 2 parts. One is synchronous, which means it happens in real time. I say something, you respond. Like I just asked if I had time and I got the response right away. That was a synchronous conversation. When I ask you in the chat, you answer me, that's synchronous communication. You have a lot of video calls. You have a lot of chats that happen in real time. That is synchronous, and we default to synchronous, and that is a mistake. When you want your company to have effective communication, you should default to asynchronous. Now, asynchronous is when, as a speaker, as the giver of the information, you give it, you broadcast it when you're ready. But the important part in asynchronous is you allow the recipient to receive the information when they are ready. There is a huge difference with that. It brings us all the way back to remote work being about freedom. We empower people to choose. We give them the option to choose when to receive and process the information. So how can my team reach a higher level of effective communication in working remotely? My top secret for that is simplify. In the Agile Manifesto, we have simplicity defined as the art of maximizing the amount of work not done. So remember this. Now, I redefined it for remote organizations. I think it's the art of maximizing the number of tools not used. Imagine if you had only one tool for communication. Which one would you use? Would you use a video conferencing and keep all the information in your head and only exchange it when you see each other? Or would you choose a written communication channel that would allow people to choose? The best organizations that I've seen who have defaulted to asynchronous communications are those that use their task management system, think Jira, Trello, Confluence, tools that allow you to keep track of the tasks and send them to other teams and all of that. They use that tool as the default for communication. Now, if I ask you what you use for communication, usually the answers that I get is chat tools and video calls. Almost nobody thinks about a task management system as a communication tool. And that's another thing that I'd like to challenge you to think about. Try to simplify the processes by which you use that tool, that system, and use and define it and clarify it and visualize it and use it to empower people to enhance their interactions and get the freedom to work from anywhere that they want. You get to stop me at any time, by the way. And when it comes to leadership, there are other challenges that are binded to the way that we lead our organizations. There is a report from McKinsey that has come out, and it shows that a lot of leaders have it much easier working remotely than their direct reports. And there is a reason for that. It's because a lot of people, a lot of leaders have not let go of their command and control, but their direct reports are actually feeling the impact of it so much more harshly. They feel judged, they feel micromanaged, they feel like their bosses are always interrupting them with meetings. So we need to let go of command and control if we want to be effective in our remote organizations. And this is my signature challenge. Every time I go into an organization, in about 2-3 weeks after I enter, I introduce this rule and I say, no meeting is mandatory. And people go like, oh my God, Agile coaches go like, but the daily stand-up is mandatory, the retrospective is mandatory, the sprint planning is mandatory. And I say, no, they're not. If you're mandating people to be there, chances are they would distract themselves and look at other things if you haven't communicated what the value is for them. When we establish the rule of no mandatory meeting, what really happens in practice is that people find ways to engage their audience. People find ways to define the purpose, the outcome, and communicate that so clearly that every individual who attends a meeting gets value from it. And that is a fundamental difference between facilitating or running a meeting. And I guess that a lot of you are familiar with this concept as well. So I'm all saying, like, if you are talking to people in a real-time conversation, try not to talk at them, but rather talk with them, engage them. There is a fundamental difference, one more time. Create transparency that is two ways. That is, it's not only the boss who sees what the employees are working on and what they're talking about, it's also the other way around, that the employees also see what the boss is working on, what is on your mind, and what is going through your coaching plan. What are you actually doing? And when you're thinking, I'm going to just stop after this. When you're thinking about transparency, remember that transparency is not only about where information is, but it's also about how information flows through the organization. Now, if you can combine simplicity, asynchronous communication, and transparency over information and processes, those 3 points would be the main points that would empower you to work remotely a lot more effectively than you do today.